Okay, hello and welcome back. Wheel cylinders. On a service, you want to be removing your drums and checking your shoe linings and also checking your wheel cylinders for any leakage. And basically what you do is just pull back the rubbers and have a look to see if they're damp. If they are damp, then there's a seal leaking. So the other check which you'd do is to make sure that both pistons move. They do seize up, and they're a bit inconvenient when they do because obviously you start to lose a braking efficiency. They're not the best system in the world, however they are something that you need to consider. More complex than but cheaper than calipers. Right, so I'll just pull out a piston here, and yes, they do come out quite easily, and what you have is a seal. If they're seized, then obviously the steel has seized in with the metal of the wheel cylinder. Right, the other thing I wanted to tell you, and I forgot about this on the last video, is the spring. Okay, some springs are actually cranked, so when you fit them around the wheel cylinder, they fit properly. They don't want to be butting up or being bent on the wheel cylinder. Our Land Rover one is straight, so it doesn't matter which way it goes because it will fit and avoid the wheel cylinder. This is something to remember because there are different brake systems there, and sometimes people ask Land Rover owners to do their brakes on the cars. Right, so springs, always replace them. They suffer quite a lot. They are subjected to heat, and quite often they spend a long time in the brake drum. Now, obviously, they're under tension, and heat and tension makes the springs go weak. So, best thing to do when you do a reline, you can see that's actually starting to corrode there, and it's not good. These springs are scrap. Basically, every time you do a reline, as we say in the trade, or change your brake shoes, you want to be putting new springs on. Okay, talking of linings. Right, I'm just going to measure these. The maximum measurement comes out at 9mm, including the backing plate. And I'll measure this, and that's at 3mm. So the backing plate is 3mm, and minus 9, that leaves a 7mm brake shoe. Now, when do you change them? Well, this is something you have to consider. These linings get contaminated, they get worn up, and you have to take the drums off to inspect, and you do that on a service. These shoes have hardly seen any life whatsoever, and the drums, obviously these were fitted with bad drums, so the shoe has been scored. I mean, you could get away with that, that would bed in again. This shoe is contaminated. Now, it's gone a dark grey slate colour. They do go black if they're glazed, which makes the shoes no good, but this one, it's hard to tell because sometimes the heat will take most of the oil off, but what you can do is get some emery cloth or some Scotch-Brite, something like that, and scuff it up, and what you'll find underneath, if it is contaminated, is an oily texture. The shoes have soaked up the oil, and basically it's made them unserviceable. These shoes are no good. Basically, it gives it more of a slide than a grip, so get rid of them. Any relines across an axle, always change both pairs of brake shoes. Okay, so here's a wheel cylinder overhaul kit from Brookwell's, and this is AEU 2498. You can see the number on there just underneath the oil stain. This is an axle set. That means you can do 2 wheel cylinders. And if you notice, it's still in the sealed packet. That's what I usually do to make sure the components inside don't get greasy. Okay, so overhauling a wheel cylinder, it's a bit of a risky game. First thing you need to consider is your bleed nipple and your pipe unions. If they don't come out, then forget it. The bleed nipple, is replaceable, 608-400, and that's from Brookwell's. So I bought 2 of those, 2 wheel cylinders, and these caps, they actually come with the brake cylinder overhaul kit, but you can buy them separately. SDC 1913, always really important. Right, so wheel cylinder number 1 here is seized, and I'm not even going to bother. I'm going to do that because the metals have corroded together, and I will know that the bore inside the wheel cylinder is no good. It will be pitted, so that's out of the way, no good. Second one here, obviously it moves, you can see that, so it has a chance. I'm saying it has a chance. This one's actually leaking. Now, there could be two reasons for this. The seal could be worn, or the bore could be either pitted or it's worn. So this is what would cause a leak, possibly. Other side's dry, okay, not a problem. What we'll need to do is take out the pistons and check them. Check the seals as well. The seals, generally, they get flat after a while. And like this one here, it's got a little bit of corrosion on it, but it hasn't actually corroded into the bore. There's also a spring inside this wheel cylinder. Some have them, some don't. This Land Rover one does. Now, I'm not sure you can see this, but there is actually a tide mark in there. You can see a little bit of corrosion in there. I don't think you'll be able to see it because the camera's not picking this up. It's actually quite hard to get a camera to show you. There you go, that's what it looks like inside. You can see the tide marks. Now, what I would look for is any type of ridge in there. It's like an engine bore. If the cylinder's got a lip on it, then obviously it needs boring out. But this one's smooth, actually. There's no ridges, no lips, so that's all right. The other thing is to look at the piston to see if it's had a wear on a thrust face. And the grooves as well, it makes a difference if they're corroded. These are okay. And you remove the seals with a screwdriver. Note the position of the seal, because the seal will open out as pressure is applied by the brake fluid as it's pushing the seal down the bore. Okay, I just had to put that down. These seals can be a little bit tricky to remove. Okay, so they come off like that. They're not reusable. You chuck them away. Now, if you can see the lip on this, the wider part always faces towards the pressure side. It's the same with any fluid seal, even your oil seal. Okay, so that one was easier to take off. Now, what I'd want to be doing is cleaning that with a wire brush, wire wool, something like that, something non-abrasive. Okay, so checking the piston, we have a little bit of corrosion on the face. It looks okay. There is no wear as such, so we're okay there. I'll just clean it with a little bit of Scotch-Brite. That's okay. You don't want to be scratching the surfaces with something like aluminium oxide paper. But basically, yeah, you want to give it a good clean, wire wheel, something like that. Now, the other thing to check for is the piston on the side towards the fluid. And sometimes you'll find it's burred. And if it is burred, it means it's been wearing in the cylinder and it's no good. Which means at this point you just want to chuck it away and put a new wheel cylinder on. I know it's a lot of hassle, but it is cheaper to overhaul these than it is to replace the wheel cylinder. Again, I'm looking for burrs on this edge here. This will be a good indication that the piston is worn. This applies to master cylinders as well. The brake master cylinder is exactly the same way of doing it. It's the same sort of seals. So if you remember, I overhauled a slave cylinder with this little brake honing tool, which is just like honing out an engine cylinder. We can do the same thing with this wheel cylinder. Okay. Using this, you've just got to be careful that you don't take it all the way out of the bore when you're running it at speed. Okay, so you stop it and then take it out. Okay. You don't need much. If you have to spend hours at it, then obviously it's a problem. It's only just a quick push through. And I can already see that the cylinder's been cleaned off. I'll try and get a light on this. Again, it's a bit tricky with the camera. But you can see the bore is clean. You can see that there? Sorry about the out of focus, but there, that's what the cylinder looks like. So that's been honed. You need to clean out the grooves where the dust covers will sit. They're very, very important, so you can do that with a screwdriver. Next thing to do is clean it thoroughly with brake cleaner, blow it out so there's no swarf left in there. Okay, So basically the bore is honed. I'm saying now that it has a 90% success rate. Doesn't always work. We've done the dirty work, so we'll get rid of these gloves and put a fresh pair on. Cleanliness is always necessary. Right, so the seal kit, here we go. There's enough to do 2 wheel cylinders or an axle set. We have the fluid seal here, and if you can see that it has a lip on it, a raised lip. As I said, this faces towards the pressure side, and that will be the back of the piston. Okay, so you can see that that is the way it goes on. So as the pressure is applied, the seal expands and stops the pressure from escaping, or the fluid escaping through and past the piston. This is the principle of seals. Now what I've done here, I've used a little bit of brake fluid because I need to get that underneath the seal. Okay, and you can see how that is positioned. I always use red rubber grease. This is good and it's compatible with brake fluid. Put some in the bore there, and it doesn't need to be liberally applied, it just needs to be enough for a coating, so we can then push the piston in. What I would suggest you do is to fit the dust cover first, and I always put a little bit of rubber grease inside there. It helps. This can be a little bit tricky, especially when it's got brake fluid on it. I do not like to use brake fluid for assembly because then you don't know if something's leaking. But in this case, these wheel cylinders, they are best to have a little bit of brake fluid on the fluid seal. This one's a pig to do. It was really awkward. I don't know why it just wouldn't go on. It's not the seal, it's just the way I'm fitting it. But there you go, that's on. Or nearly on. No, not quite. It needs to sit in the groove. After then, it's just a matter of gently pushing it into the bore. Okay, there it goes. If you push it the wrong way, the seal folds or splits, and then you don't have an effective seal. Next thing to do is to then do the same process with the other piston, and of course I put the spring in the middle. Just a little tip here, when you're pushing one piston in, hold at the other so it doesn't pop the other side out. Okay, so once the piston's in, next thing to do is to get the dust covers completely seated properly. And I'll show you here that you do not want to leave them like this, because what will happen is you'll get an ingress of dirt underneath the seal and it will seize that wheel cylinder up very, very quickly. So it's really important that the grooves are cleaned out and the rubbers are sitting properly. Okay, so there's a wheel cylinder overhaul. There's not much to it at all, as long as you know now how to do it. Next thing to do, clean it up, bleed up the brakes, and then check under pressure. What I would suggest here is to clamp off the 2 pistons so they don't pop out, bleed up the brakes and put some pressure on it. This will be a check to see if there's any leaks. Now you probably noticed I didn't get the dust covers on properly. These were awkward to say the least. So I used a screwdriver, and the worst part is if it's on the backing plate on the vehicle, is at the back of the wheel cylinder. But I got them on with fiddling it with a screwdriver, so they are completely sealed now. So what we have here is an operating wheel cylinder. So there you go.